Some of the things that happen to people in Dwell, pretty bad. Covered up scandals, yeah, there's a few. Abuser apologetics, yep.
Xenos is evil. Dwell is evil. They will corrupt children into thinking we are super fun, but at the same time, they will eat up every square moment of your time. They will take everything good. They will separate you from your family. And they will take your self-esteem and they will make you feel that you are nothing. I am 40 years old and I still don't know who the hell I am.
Hello and welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren and I grew up deep in the evangelical church. I'm really genuinely glad that you are here watching me today because we're going to be diving into something that is really impactful and has caused a lot of damage in a lot of lives. Is going to hit close to home for a lot of people. I've actually had several of you from this group reach out to me, and one of you I actually interviewed, and you'll be able to see clips of that included in my video today. We're going to be talking about Xenos Christian Fellowship, which is now changed its name and is known as Dwell Community Church. If that name rings a bell, whether it's through your own personal experience, a friend's story, or maybe you've even heard just people talking about it, whispering about it through the local news, online forums, or friendships that you might have, you probably know that this conversation is not going to be super quick or an easy one, but it is definitely necessary. And I think that even if you didn't personally attend Xenos, or Dwell Community Church, this is something that you're going to be able to relate to if you grew up in a high control religious environment. I want to give my disclaimer that I give in every video here, which is that I never want to make these videos with the intent of coming down on anybody who is just, a regular member participating in one of these groups.
I didn't know I was in a cult. I thought they were just the best church and I wasn't good enough.
Gaylord says she held on to that belief for years until other former members began telling their stories. That's what empowered her to tell her own story to the world.
If you stumbled upon this video and you are currently in Xenos Dwell and you've had maybe different experiences, I invite you to watch this video and ask yourself some hard questions about your experience there. But I'm open to hearing other experiences.
I can't stop now because I want to prevent girls like me or anybody, these young kids, from going through what I went through.
Gaylord told me she still has nightmares. Now, she and other former members have formed an online and in-person support group.
I'm not here to attack any of the members. This is something that is a flaw in the structure, in the system, and with the leadership in these types of organizations.
And we had cult apologetics. Mm-hmm. We're not a cult because... And some of those were bullshit because we actually did those things.
Do you feel like they did directly address, this is what people might say about us and this is how we would respond to that?
Sometimes we had very specified apologetics. Mm-hmm. Oh, they just had a bad experience, mm-hmm. Right? This isn't endemic to us. We don't really need to apologize as an organization. It's just that people need to work out their problems. You've normalized that behavior across your groups. And it has come from a top down, and you believe sincerely that it is love. And that's the problem.
This is a problem with the program, with the structure, with the organization, not with individuals that are attending it.
Yeah, and I think it's the normalized treatment of the Bible as a deferred authority, and the elevation of themselves as true arbiters or dispensers or adjudicators or whatever big word you want to use. Authorize people to, use the text to cultivate clones.
So Dwell and, Xenos, it's a great example of a high control religious environment. There are a ton of different high control religious environments in churches throughout the United States. I'll heap judgment onto the leaders of the organization, but normal members are really the ones who are bearing most of the consequences, I mean, all of the consequences of this behavior. So they're really the victims here. And I think that's important to say and to remember throughout this video. Behind the language of community and discipleship and accountability, there are also a lot of stories that are real and raw and can sometimes even be honestly heartbreaking. They're stories of spiritual manipulation, loss of personal autonomy, and deep religious trauma that deserves to be heard and believed. Religious trauma syndrome is something that is completely real. Go look it up and learn more about it if it's something that you think that you might have been impacted by. It's something that is not talked about enough, and I think more people need to be aware that being part of these types of religious groups can cause real and lasting trauma and damage. I've spent a lot of time deep diving into this topic, listening to interviews of people who have personally been a part of Xenos Dwell, and interviewing somebody myself who we'll get to in a moment. I'll let them introduce themselves.
So I'm Nick, former Dwell Community Church member. I go by Nitty on YouTube. So if you're familiar with my channel at all, that's, where you've seen me before. And if you're not, you can go over there. As for introductions, that's just basically who I am. And I, run a YouTube channel where I do talk about cult dynamics. And that comes up when I review other Christian content.
It really opened my eyes. So I'm coming here with, a lot of background information, not personal experience. All of these claims are alleged by people who are in the group. If you've never heard of Xenos-Dwell before, here's what you need to know. This is not your average megachurch. And yet most people outside of Central Ohio have never even heard of it before. I hadn't until one of you reached out to me. And once I started doing research, I just could not stop digging.
It wasn't until after college that I became more interested in Christianity and things of that nature. And I became more interested in it through someone that lived in the same condominiums as me. And I was coming home very late from night clubbing, of all things. And they stopped me in the staircase. And because we were similar age, hi, what's going on? And then they randomly asked me, are you a believer? And I'm like, a believer in what? Like, what the heck kind of question is that? Right?
Yeah.
They're like, in Jesus, silly. I'm like, oh, no, And she's like, well, I go to this church. It's all people our age. You should come check it out. And so I was actually, pretty lonely. I had moved to that condominium after high school. And just come back from college, right? So I didn't have any real rooting or connections to anything else. And here comes along this person and their community of people. They seem kind of progressive, and I could identify with that, and they were accepting. And I just started to go more and more, and it did develop some more interest in me, and it seemed to start to answer my general sense and confusion around what a God was or how other people understand God. I, got like a prayer journal and a new Bible, a very cheap one, but a new Bible. And I was going to that for just a couple months. And then I got a job in Columbus, Ohio, and I moved down there with absolutely no real friends, just a loose connection from college. I went down here for a job that I somehow landed. I moved into a tiny apartment, and a friend of mine from my Mennonite school had seen some of my Facebook posts about going to this small Bible study in the Cleveland area. And they said, well, if you're interested in Christianity, why don't you check out this church, Dwell, formerly Xenos. Why don't you check that out? Because when I went to New Orleans for Katrina, they were there helping out too. And so I know that they have people our age going there. You should go check it out. So he gives me the email address of one of the people that goes to that church. And I emailed them and they're like, yeah, come check it out. Of course, like free evangelism.
It's not usually they're coming to you. You have to go out and find them. So
right. I was a lost sheep coming home.
Yes.
In their take, right? And so this answers your question, how did I become familiar with it? And I roll up to this like frat house, but it's like a real house, right? It's not like the big expanded buildings where it's like a dorm, but really broed out. Yeah. It's an actual like house. So if you're not familiar with Ohio State campus, there's a bunch of rental properties for sophomores and up. But they're not official Ohio State connected, but they're a housing option for lots of college students. And they're almost exclusively, most homes are rented to college students. And so I'm coming up to that, and I see this dude, just like a black leather hat, like cowboyish hat and like trench coat, smoking a cigarette. And I was kind of the goth influence a little bit. And I'm like, I'll fit right in. And so I go and I listen to the Bible study, and I see all these people my age just really invested in it, excited about it. They're asking me questions. And I, as a low-key theist, actually say, maybe God brought me here.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was part of that Christian group. I was starting to get ideologically and psychologically committed to this notion that Christianity could be true. And maybe this was another move that God was making to bring me closer to it. And so I started going. I had two gentlemen really take an interest in me, and we got coffee a couple times. And thinking back on the conversations we had about the Bible, I mean, they're kind of laughable in committed Christian circles. And so, I was talking about like Glenn Beck and Fox News as we read over Romans, to this thing where that's not like an emphasis, right? It's pretty loose, young, excitable, people that aren't really trying to push like, we're pro-life and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not a real overt fundamentalism, right? And there's not like prim and proper dress. Everyone drinks, or could drink. Everyone could smoke, not weed, but they could smoke, right?
It has thousands of members going strong, a sprawling campus, and a massive influence at The Ohio State University. They also have a culture that reaches into basically every part of their members' lives, spiritually, socially, intellectually, and even in some cases, romantically.
I was made to give an account of my whole day for months on end by my discipler. Every minute of my day. And if I didn't, then I was not righteous in God, and I wasn't using my time appropriately. I wasn't to be trusted with discipleship. I moved from one group to another when I got married, and my discipler literally took my new discipler and said, don't give her ministry, because she's not to be trusted.
So today we're going to be talking about Dwell through the lens of what many of you would call a high control religious group. And yes, I would even use the word cult. Not because that word is trendy right now or sensational, but because for many people, that's exactly what it feels like.
It's very authoritarian. They call themselves publicly a high commitment church. Those of us who have left would say it's a high control church, but it is, they've tried to rebrand that as a high commitment church.
This I also found incredibly interesting. When I was mulling over the church's admissions to cult-like behaviours in its past, and the work they say they did to root out controlling aspects from leadership, I couldn't tee this up in my mind with the idea of a high commitment church. And I think that could be where the leader's insistence that their organisation isn't harmful comes into conflict with its very nature. If something demands such high commitment of members that they are unable to live well-rounded lives with ample time for their own endeavours and pursuits, as well as healthy relationships with friends and family outside of the group, then the group is always going to harm people. It can't really be conducive to good mental health with those kinds of expectations on members' time. Publicly declaring yourself high commitment seems like publicly declaring yourself potentially damaging.
And that's the experience that they have when they participate in this organization. Understanding where Dwell came from helps us understand what it actually has become today. Dwell Community Church, originally Xenos Christian Fellowship, was founded in the early 1970s at a time of countercultural spiritual teachings going on in America and just soul searching. It started as a really small Bible study that was led by Dennis McCallum, who would go on to become one of the most powerful figures in the church's history of the leadership structure. From the beginning, Xenos positioned itself as something different, something that was deeper than your average church body. It wasn't about Sunday services or traditionalism. It was about total commitment and biblical literacy and an intellectually rigorous approach to faith. And that on its own is not inherently bad. I honestly would have loved the idea back when I was a Christian of joining a church that would have helped me get super connected in, build a quick community, and really learn about the Bible. But this being executed over time is where things started to veer into really dangerous territory. The church grew rapidly, especially among college students and young adults. This is largely due to its house church model, which if you've ever heard me talk about house churches on this channel, what do I say? I say don't go to house churches because it's probably a cult. There is a reason why churches would choose to decentralize from any sort of denomination and to not go through or affiliate with a denomination. It's different if you are doing that, if you're a church plant and you're just using someone's home temporarily before you build your building or something, you know what I mean? There are certain situations where I think like a house church can make sense, but there should be a clear structure, a clear denomination, a clear plan, a clear hierarchy that you are comfortable with if you're going to engage in that. And yeah, I stand by it, period. I don't think it's worth the risk. If you encounter a home church, don't go to home church. Find a different church. There are so many churches, some of which are great, and they would love to have you.
I'm like, oh yeah, this is a relaxed environment. I could see myself being a part of it. And I keep meeting with these gentlemen and going to their meetings. And one of the things that will happen with this church is that you'll get introduced to more and more meetings.
Instead of just going to one large service a week, members are really encouraged at Dwell and really expected, honestly, to attend these small house church meetings throughout the week. And yes, when I say throughout the week, I really do mean throughout, not just once a week on Sundays. These are where the real spiritual life of Dwell ends up happening.
I was asked to come to our CT, insider language, right? Central teaching is what they call it. And it's basically the Sunday service, but at night for young people. Okay, so it's hip, it's cool, it's out of the way of your class schedule and your day job. So why don't you come? What else are you doing? And I start going to that too. They present some basic apologetics, like here are reasons we believe this, or reasons we use to support what we already believe, which is common with a lot of apologetics. My impressions of it were that this is not only a relaxed place, but it's also an intellectual place. I'm a person who gets obsessed with like lore and like the depths of topics, a little bit more with philosophy lately, but definitely like religion in particular. Like I really liked the history of Christianity class I took. And these people were not afraid to go deep.
They're framed as intimate spaces for growth and where you can receive and give mentorship, have accountability, and grow community. I can see, again, why that would be compelling, why you would want that. And especially as somebody that was once a young Christian, a young adult Christian that was seeking a community, being able to actually connect in and have clear opportunities and avenues to do that, that is not common, and it would make it extremely attractive.
You go to the home church meeting, which is where I started out. That's, really close, tight-knit experience, right? And then you go to the central teachings, and afterwards, they hang out for a couple more hours.
Wow.
Yeah, so you go to this like 1 hour and some change thing, and then you hang out for 1 or 2 hours more after that. And sometimes you get dinner before that, right? So your social engagement just grows and grows. It's not something that when you start getting into it, you can detect as like love bombing. I don't think that's the intent of a lot of people in the group, especially the young ones. They don't really know better, but this is a normalized behavior that they're using for themselves just as much as a means to an end, right? Because people do love connection and the intrigue of a new person. And so it's just as addicting for them as it is for you to be this engaged with this group. And it's a unique experience, right? Because I could go to the megachurch if I wanted to. And I did actually check out like Vineyard and a more traditional church. And I'm like, this is stale. This is dry. I'm too anonymous. And so that's a big draw for young people too, is that you do have this dynamic, closer place to develop these relationships. And people do know you by name. People show that they're excited to have you there. That was definitely different from traditional churches there.
But I think that we're kind of trained to want that type of community, and then you're trained to give that same love then to newcomers. You don't feel like you're perpetuating the cycle.
The house church model also became a core mechanism of control over time for the participants.
In the same way that you're gradually introduced to this, you're given more and more opportunities to be invited to things that are talked about, but that you're not a participant of. And these things are praised. These things are special, like prayer group. Prayer group is a common one to be introduced to first. In this case, it was a meeting before the meetings. So it naturally kind of builds into your schedule, right? Why don't you come to prayer group before home church? Oh yeah, I'll come to prayer group. Like what's there to lose? Like I'm already trying to learn how to pray.
Yeah.
On my own. Why don't I pray with other people to, maybe help me pray? There's like the, gendered, which gender and sex to them are very much the same, Bible studies. And those two are an elevated experience. They're pitched as elevated experiences. Like, hey, you've been coming here quite a bit and you seem like you're really committed. Would you want to check out our men's group? It's presented, again, very benign, but special, right? It's very much, I get to be part of this privilege of really studying the Bible. Let's get in deep. We look at the very words in their Greek. I mean, it's intense. I think it's really helped me. And it is an opportunity to connect with even more like-minded people that you can identify on this very bodily fundamental level. And that is yet another meeting that gets added to your schedule. So now I've got my 1-on-2 Bible, hangout thing before central teaching. I've got home church, right? Which is now, itself a 2-hour experience so far. So CT was like a 2 to 3 hours. So that's 5 hours of my week, right? Now I've got cell group, which in itself for the teaching or discussion is like an hour and a half. And then it's encouraged that you stay more. So then it's like a 3-hour experience. So now I'm at 8 hours.
It's like all of your social time spent.
Yeah, it gets up there, right? Oh, just wait, and that's at like a nominal level to them. And I'm like, this is so crazy. Like, I didn't know there was so much to this.
Leaders, sometimes very young and uneducated and untrained, newly converted people themselves, sometimes these leaders are given a huge amount of spiritual responsibility, and they're expected to mentor other people. They're expected to guide, correct, and even discipline other members that they've brought in, often with little oversight.
I fooled around with my husband, my soon-to-be husband, and I was chased around a house. Chased around a house by a woman screaming, "You enjoyed it. Just say you enjoyed it." And then for months I was told I was a whore. Well, my fiance had 2 conversations. 2.
I have to say that I won't go too far into this, but this discipleship method to me feels very similar to a lot of my other critiques on groups like Chi Alpha, where they have a recruitment model that is very similar to a pyramid scheme.
Kind of on my own, tried to develop a relationship with a newer person. And that gets deemed as discipleship, right? Where you are using your Bible knowledge and trying to transfer it and your commitment to God, transfer that over to someone else. So that's actually the purpose of that one-on-two meeting. And eventually what it became for me, and then it was like one-on-one after a while, another person my age and I got together and we read the Bible. Did the same thing as like the men's group, but on a more one-on-one personal level. And I wanted to share that with someone else. And so I tried that. I had another friend that I met at work, and they were an intern or whatever. And I brought them to the group. And there was an experience I had before, getting all the invites where I really identified my self-critical person as sinful. And I had a conversion experience at one of those home groups through the passage in 1 Timothy where Paul says he's like the chief of all sinners, and yet God can forgive him, right?
Like Jesus Christ came to save the sinners, of whom I am the worst.
Yes. You nailed it.
Yeah. I have it tattooed on my
No way.
That's
1
hilarious.
Timothy 15 and 16?
Yes. Well,
1:15,
it's 1
16,
Timothy 1:15. It's more.
Yeah, that is amazing. Wow. But yeah, that actually, kicked off my conversion experience. And something else that will happen in a group like this is that increases their identification with you and your identification with them, because you get basically showered with love. Tell me what really convinced you? Like, how is it that you believe in Jesus just like me? And lots of people will ask you that, and it becomes your ticket into these other experiences like the prayer group and the men's group, right? Because you believe, right? Now you belong in this way of thinking. You share this fundamental piece of your identity with us. So back to discipleship, right? I tried to replicate that in other people, right? One of my coworker ended up receiving Christ, having that conversion experience with me. I led them to Christ, right? That's the lingo we use for going down the Romans road and using passages like showing them that they're a sinner and that it's so easy to believe, right? And to be rescued by Jesus at the end of everything. And as I got more involved in that process, it's pitched to you, well, if you want to become a really good discipler, you should try taking some of our theological classes. And those are pitched as they're a really awesome tool, not only for discipleship, but also your personal growth. If you want to grow spiritually, you should really engage God's word. I know you're coming to the cell group. I know you come to every home church and central teaching, but I mean, this is like college level, bro. Take, their first couple Bible classes, intro to the Bible. It's like an hour for 6 weeks. Okay. Then there's Christian growth, which is an hour for like 8 weeks. There's homework. And then there's, what do they call it? LTC. So again, insider language for leadership training class. Now this thing is more of like a collegiate, like there's like an outline. You have to write essays. Wow. You have to look at the Greek sometimes and try and see what conclusions you can reach from what this passage is saying from a Protestant view. There's 6 of those, and 2 of them at the end are reserved for people who really have shown their commitment to God and leading not only one person in discipleship, but starting to lead the men's group or women's group studies and being invited to teach at the home group. So over the years of my involvement, I had that 8 to 10 hours of commitment through all that. Now I'm adding that 1 to 2 hours of those Bible study classes, and leadership training class is 3 hours. So now it's like 15, 16 hours. I don't know how college kids get like academic excellence while they're trying to do this church. In fact, sometimes academic excellence is discouraged. I became more and more involved in the intellectual pursuit, but also the social pursuit and the leadership dynamics, right, which are extolled as well. Yeah. And that's what I think is part of a drive for lots of people. It's not just the community, but there's also some pressure. Like it can start subtly, right? Internal pressure to gain that foothold that is emphasized, leading in some capacity, exercising a spiritual gift. And that's really promoted and applauded. Yay, look at you. You're really exercising a spiritual gift. Most of the time it has to be leadership. And that's also when they'll start to say, hey, it'd be really awesome of you if you started contributing to the church to really fund these classes that you're taking, right? It's actually kind of what you're obligated to do because, these people have to put food on the table. It started as 3% of my income, 5% of my income, and eventually, the 10% tithe. And you find yourself after years and years, it doesn't feel bad.
I have to keep going back to this throughout my research and throughout this video because it does feel like this recruitment, this forced buy-in of building people under you to grow within the ranks of the church, that is a pyramid. It's looking awfully pointy at the top.
So my husband and I were actually in a home church with one of the men who started Xenos back in the 70s. We were getting trained under them to be leaders one day, and you're not allowed to be a leader unless you have at least 2 disciples under you. If you have 1, you're not allowed. They very much believe that numbers means God's behind you.
As Xenos continued to grow, so did its influence, and they acquired massive properties, they launched ministries on college campuses, and they developed their own internal literature and training programs that were unique to the Dwell or Xenos sphere. At its peak, Dwell had thousands of members spread across dozens of house churches, youth ministries, and para-church initiatives. But alongside that growth came an increasing number of red flags.
This is an 11-page form former members say disciplers fill out about members. Not only does it include questions about the members' financial contributions to the church, it asks about things like how much the member shares about themselves, their sexuality, character issues such as sarcasm, and whether they have a killer instinct when giving the gospel. Craig says her character issues involved openly questioning leadership.
There are stories that include coercion, secrecy, spiritual abuse, no shocker there, manipulation, and so much more as you're going to come to see throughout this video. In 2020, amid the growing scrutiny, Xenos announced a rebrand. They're now Dwell Community Church. Now, leaders say that the name change was about better reflecting their mission and moving away from a word, Xenos, that people did not understand. But for a ton of the ex-members, it felt like a strategic rebranding, which I also felt too in doing my research. It definitely felt like a way for the church to distance itself from the ever-growing stack of controversies and evidence that was coming up against them without, making any sort of real internal changes, that people looking up Dwell Community Church weren't going to find the articles and the Reddit threads and the support groups. Yes, you heard that right. Support groups for people who have left this church. To me, it just seems very convenient. As somebody that works in marketing worked in marketing, I lost my job, but hopefully will work in marketing soon again. As somebody that worked in marketing and previously has worked in public relations in the Los Angeles area, I do have a little bit of insight into branding and brand management. I say a little bit because I really specialize in B2B. I don't really do, to consumer. Because of my background in those things, I do look at it as a strategy. And is it worth it if I were advising them, although it's not my specialty, to work with churches, if I worked with them and I were going to advise them and say, should you change your name? This is really a conversation that I've had, at jobs with businesses wanting to change their names or change their logos. The question is, are you trying to make it, harder for people to find you? Because if that's the case, if you are essentially just trying to relaunch a new business, a new face, it might be worth it. It might be worth it to do it. I don't want to give cult advice. I don't think cults should be operating, but in general, if you have a ton of bad press, or say a TikTok got posted about your business and you got flooded with a bunch of false reviews that you just can't take down, yeah, I think that changing your business name may be the right choice. But for a church, I would say, Xenos is something that people have on merch, right? They probably have lanyards, Xenos lanyards and Xenos t-shirts, and it's branded. So this is and they're a megachurch. So this is a huge financial undertaking to rebrand, redo the logo, potentially redo all of the colors. It is just completely different. And you will then limit your audience or your viewership, because think about it. If I change my name on YouTube to something random like Lauren's videos, the next time you go search for Unreligiously, even if you're trying to find my account, even if you subscribe to me, you're not going to be pulling up my channel, Lauren's videos. It's going to be way harder for you to find me. In that way, they're able to get a rebuild, I guess, a more willing crowd. Maybe it's a smaller one, but if the old one is just filled with hate and people, it's not hate, it's valid criticism, but if it's just filled with not the response you're trying to get, that may be the right choice. For them, it's clear, though, that they have all of these controversies. So if I were advising them, I would say, listen, it is possible, right? It's possible if you're going to be changing a lot. If you're going to be changing a lot about your church, you can change your name, and I think that could be meaningful. Changing your name just to better reflect your values is not a valid reason that someone would change their name. All right, that's my marketing brain. I'm harping on that a little bit too much, and I know it, so we're going to move on to talking about the high control group dynamics that go on in the group, because they really are the heart of what makes Dwell not just difficult, but deeply damaging for so many people that have been part of it. It's important to also understand the harm doesn't stem just from a single charismatic leader or an isolated, problematic doctrine that the church might espouse. Instead, the environment itself is actually built on a system of control that operates at every single level of the church.
But whoa, you're obese? We got to work on that, especially in the college group. Obese people were given these kind of, not ultimatums, but relational pressure to be considering their weight and doing something about it, right? When some people, it's genetic, they can't do shit.
Yeah.
This skinny people, not usually, unless they really thought you were anorexic or something.
It shapes how members think, how they relate to other people, and even how they make decisions in some cases. This control is embedded into the culture, the social structures, and even the spiritual language that is used within the group. It's completely systemic, and that goes back to my earlier point. It's not the participants' fault. Here are the core dynamics that come up again and again when I am doing my research and in people's experiences at Dwell. First, we have to talk about authoritarian leadership. In Dwell, power is centralized, and it does follow a really rigid top-down hierarchy. Leaders, who are oftentimes house church leaders, are treated as spiritual authorities whose guidance is expected to be followed without any kind of pushback or complaining. Disagreeing with them is not treated as thoughtful critique. It's frequently spiritualized as rebellion, pride, or even immaturity. Questioning leadership can lead to confrontation that you definitely don't want, correction that's humiliating, or even being labeled as divisive within the church and being asked to leave. This dynamic creates a culture where loyalty to leadership is equated with loyalty to God, and where obedience is valued over personal conviction or any kind of discernment. Members are trained to seek approval before making decisions and to silence the doubts that they might have in order to seem more spiritually mature and on board with the program. The next issue is the issue of love bombing and conditional belonging. This is probably something that a lot of you have experienced in church environments before. When someone first enters Dwell, they are often met with overwhelming warmth and love and inclusion. People might invite them to dinners and to study lessons and to group hangouts or other types of things, and they might feel like there is an instant connection. For a while, it can feel super affirming and really good, especially if you're new to the area or young or trying to find your faith. Over time, Many realize that the love and support are conditional. They weren't just receiving it for free. Belonging was based on compliance, and once somebody starts to question the teachings or pull away from group norms or just make decisions that are outside of leadership's expectations for you, like they're your parents, that warmth can really quickly disappear. Friends can be distant from you, invitations might stop coming, support can turn into opportunities to correct you, and the shift can be subtle or it can be sudden, but it does reinforce the same message that acceptance is not unconditional and it is earned through your obedience to their rules, not to the Bible, not to God, but their interpretation of it all, their interpretation for your life. Then there's the social isolation.
That is a way to control, information. They control your access in a way to what you're going to watch on the internet through things like Covenant Eyes, right? It could flag Game of Thrones, right?
While Dwell doesn't outright ban relationships with outsiders, it really does strongly discourage them.
You get a lot of relational pressure to exit a premarital sex relationship. In fact, you'll get a lot of relational pressure, especially in the college group, to exit relationships with non-members because their commitment to God will be doubted. You're in here, you want to be equally yoked with someone as committed to the Lord as you are. And are they really getting that from going to a different church than you? Now that is culty, right? Because that introduces into the bite model that relational control. And even information control, right? Because that's another perception and way to experience Christianity that is now foreign. It's other to us. It's frowned upon to be more progressive.
Members are urged to center their lives around the church, whether it's socially, emotionally, or even just practically, like physically with your time.
With how you eat, where you spend your time, how you can even interact with people is sometimes criticized to a degree where it's like, what? Questioning leadership is discouraged, right? Because they're real servants of God. So how can you question like their decisions and stuff like that?
Manipulative.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. The start of what makes it cult-like, right? The other thing is extolling commitment, developing this privileged in-group, right? That's culty, right? And I think what a lot of ex-members experience that is a problem are those moments where there's undue influence or double bind situations, which are very damaging, right? Emotionally scarring. It can induce trauma. So one example of a double bind is, well, I really need income. So I have to work a job. I have to work a job and maintain my schooling. But I live in this special house called a ministry house. And in order to do that, I signed a contract to be at most of the meetings. In your discipleship relationship or at a cell group, you could be sat down and it'll go something like this. Well, we notice that you're missing a lot of meetings for these worldly things. Are you too invested in your schooling? Can't you really find a way to work different shifts?
Worldly, in their mind, anything that's not active involvement with their church, is that?
Right. Yeah. Or what fits the type of clone they're trying to make of you. You maintain order and cohesion to this social group that is your only one at this point. And worse yet is that if you break that house covenant, your very housing is in jeopardy. What are you supposed to do? If you go this way, you're screwing up your life socially, housing wise. Or if you go that way, you are losing money, losing economic mobility because you literally can't work and you can't excel at your schooling. It's insane.
Family and friends outside the group are often framed as worldly or even as spiritually harmful influences. Dating non-members can even be seen as dangerous. And that's another thing that if you grew up in the church, the evangelical church, that is something that you might have seen before. The breakup with your boyfriend nights every year at summer camp really come to mind here. But dating non-members is discouraged, and over time this pulls people deeper into the echo chamber that is Dwell, where most of the interactions happen with other members who reinforce the same kind of worldview. As outside connections fade, it becomes increasingly difficult to imagine a life outside of the church or to trust voices that challenge its authority. Closely tied to this is exclusivity. Dwell often teaches people that they have a uniquely correct and uncompromised understanding of Christianity. They might make you feel like other churches, even ones that are really faithful or fundamentalist churches, are portrayed as being watered down, corrupt, or overly emotional. It builds in us versus them type of mentality that can isolate members from the outside world or from walking away, because that's where all of the bad stuff is. That's where all of the evil that they're trying to be protected from is. When they leave the church, it's not just seen as leaving the church, it's seen as leaving God's will for your life, walking away from his path. Another core feature is control over personal lives. The leaders in Dwell are deeply involved in members' private decisions, and it's a little weird.
Yep. I was kind of confused about how it spread from one person to another to now the entire leadership team knows kind of what's going on with me.
Her mentors approached her about it multiple times.
Because at first I thought they were really looking out for my walk with God, and they were looking more into like, hey, they want me to be this better person, they have expectations. But slowly it turned into like what you said, like a head on a swivel, like, should I watch what I'm saying more? Should I just not question things?
Craig says it was her questioning that led to her mentors asking her to leave Xenos after 7 years.
Is that a church? No, I don't consider that a church. I do not consider that a church at all.
What would you consider Xenos?
I would consider it cult.
It's often under the banner of spiritual guidance or discipleship, which can include a lot of advice or pressure around where to live, who to marry or date, what kind of jobs to take, how to spend money, or even how to spend your free time. While it's rarely mandated outright, there is oftentimes an unspoken expectation that you're going to comply with the group rules. And there are consequences for people who don't. Non-compliance can cause members to lose their sense of autonomy and their own internal compass. And it can make them start relying instead on leadership to define what is wise or mature or faithful or right for their lives. There's also a really heavy reliance on fear-based teaching. Many members are taught explicitly or implicitly that questioning the church or leaving it could result in serious spiritual consequences for them. Some people are told that stepping back means stepping away from God, like I said, or sometimes it's just putting yourself at risk from the intense judgment that you might face. You might genuinely fear losing your entire support network overnight, and the message is clear that you need to stay inside and follow the rules. And if you leave, then you're not really welcome back. It keeps people compliant even when their conscience or their intuition or their family members are telling them to leave. Then there's also this culture that is steeped in peer policing and in surveillance, which is completely unhealthy. It's not just the leaders who enforce conformity, it's the entire community. Members are often expected to hold each other accountable, to confront one another over perceived sins, and to report those issues to the church leadership. What starts as encouragement towards spiritual growth quickly becomes a system that you're participating in that focuses on monitoring and where everybody is just watching everyone else. People begin to self-censor or manage their own image in order to avoid correction, and it makes this sense of authenticity really go away. In its place is just this kind of performative obedience. Even really close friendships can become strained under the weight of that kind of pressure. And underpinning it all is the strategic use of shame and guilt. Members are constantly evaluating their spiritual performance. Are they evangelizing enough? Are they confessing regularly? Are they being appropriately accountable? Falling short is not, or rarely is met with compassion.
Let's just leave it at that. For people's, gender identity, for people's sense of their own personalities, right? Well, they're just not, very sociable. They're not meant to lead a Bible study. And yet that's the extolled and elevated thing for the greater sense of belonging. And it leads them into these situations of cognitive dissonance, depression, and ultimately like relational abuse, because they just aren't those things. And they're being demonized for who they fundamentally are. Sometimes mental health things are stigmatized as spiritual problems. Yeah. And I mean, that's horrific. Absolutely. Like, I experienced a severe depression, and the first recommendations for me were to go to a spiritual Christian counselor, not official medical treatment, right? When now I'm like, get help.
A licensed therapist.
Like, if you want to get Christian counseling, by all means, go nuts, right? Do that, but please seek medical attention.
It's oftentimes met with correction, admonishment, and exclusion. People internalize the belief that they are not ever going to be quite good enough. Vulnerability becomes really risky. It's not a safe environment to explore spiritually. Many former members actually really stress that they were living in a chronic state of anxiety and were always worried that they were just failing spiritually. Finally, there's the suppression of emotional expression. Dwell places a strong emphasis on intellectual understanding of scripture and often discourages emotional vulnerability from its members. Feelings like sadness or doubt, confusion, anger, they're all treated as signs of spiritual weakness or immaturity. Emotional needs are often minimized or dismissed from members, and people who express their concerns or mistreatment, they might be told that they're being too self-focused or selfish and that they need to be more submissive to church leadership. Over time, in that kind of environment, people obviously learn to repress their feelings and to approach faith like a checklist. It's super detached from emotional honesty and any sort of nuance. This can lead to stunted emotional development and serious mental health consequences down the line for the members.
When you are part of this for more than a decade and you do doubt, or you don't feel like this is working, or this is really the church you want to keep going with your family, you still love Jesus. Yeah. You still love God. But maybe something more progressive is for your family. Maybe you don't agree with, you don't want to see your children go into the college group, right? You still love everyone there. You love Jesus. You love how to study the Bible, all that stuff. But that attitude or that kind of spiritual doubt is heavily discouraged, right? Grow where you're planted. Same kind of thing as the college person that is like not demonstrating as the same kind of commitment. You're faced again with a double bind. Well, I'm in this church and it is a place where I have all these relationships, but I can see that there's some problems. On the other hand, if I leave the church, I lose all those relationships, even if, and I'm told it's a big if, I fix those problems. And so what choice do you make? They both have an incredible cost. That's extremely, painful to go through. I've watched other people go through it, and unfortunately, I tried to manipulate them to stay my kind of clone, because I believe that's love and I believe that's the best thing for them.
When you put all of these together, these dynamics can paint you guys a bigger picture of the system of control that goes on, and that doesn't always look extreme on the surface, but over time, it does reshape how people think, how they end up living their lives, the very real decisions that they make, and how they relate to themselves and others, and it can impact them permanently. The hardest part is that it can start to feel really normal once you're in the group. When every voice that's around you just affirms what is happening and the patterns that you're seeing, it can be almost impossible to see things for how they are. And that's why naming them clearly is really, really important, because healing begins with clarity, and clarity starts with truth. And I can promise you, you are not likely to get the truth from Dwell. So what is the impact of all of this? When somebody leaves Dwell, it's not usually just a clean break. It can be really just incredibly painful because so much of their identity is wrapped up in the church and the community that they built there. The friends, their relationships with the leadership, they might have been mentoring other people, and that's all held into one space, and now they have to walk away from all of it. Really common after effects that members report include a loss of autonomy, so feeling like they aren't able to fully make decisions without outside approval because they're so used to relying on the church and that environment telling them how to live, how to behave, what their morals were. It can also give people a huge crisis of identity, not feeling like they know who they are outside of the church. This is something that can come with deconstruction too, and when you leave a cult, you do have to deconstruct the cult. Deconstruction is not something that is specific to evangelical Christianity or healthy religious settings. Deconstruction can apply to any sort of belief system that you need to rework or work through or understand.
In addition to that, I could lose all of my relationships. Mm-hmm. If I'm not as convinced as them, I lose all my invites. I lose my status. I lose that sense of belonging and purpose. That started to work at me. And it was really kind of devastating when I realized that I had gone through this process and it wasn't like a single thing, right? And for some people, it's not a single thing that converts them to Christianity either. What's interesting in my case is that it didn't happen through direct relationship like Christianity does. That gives it a little bit more integrity or something.
Yeah.
Not that I'm better than anyone, but I didn't have that kind of social influence to depart from it. I'm convinced this is true, and I can't do anything about it. I don't think we really get to choose that much what we believe. Believing is the performance of what you're convinced of. Everyone sees what you appear to believe. I didn't feel like I can control that, and I like to be consistent. I eventually came to a conclusion, okay, I'm not really convinced. And then a leader approached me, this is one of the most awful experiences I've ever had as an adult. The person I had studied with so long took me on a walk and asked me, why are you even here? Maybe I'll just experience whatever I need. Some other piece of evidence will come in and I won't be able to deny the truth of it.
Yeah.
And my family is here.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with you? I've cultivated these relationships with you and everyone around here for 12 years, in some cases, and you're telling me that I fundamentally don't belong.
It had to be so isolating, and it, with all the time commitment that you've already explained, it's like that is a lot of your socializing. So much of church is this self-help element and self-improvement, and when you leave, all of a sudden everyone's opinions just change of you, and they believe that you're this terrible person now, and realizing that or having someone vocally express that and saying, why are you even showing up here anymore, would be so horrible, because it's hard to accept that even without people, saying it point blank.
Yeah. I forgot to mention this earlier, but we also, in the cult-like behavior, otherize people who leave. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe they just didn't like repenting. Maybe they didn't want to confess some secret sin. Maybe, they are in rebellion from the commitment to God that he would ask of them anyway. Maybe they don't like suffering, right? Mm-hmm. All these excuses and psychologizing, which are toxic. They're awful things to do. And when people leave after having done that and see it for what it is, I believe that happened to me.
Then there's spiritual trauma. We already talked about that one, but there is religious trauma syndrome. It's very real, and I really encourage you to look into it if you think it's something that you could be suffering from. You can also have mental health challenges like depression or anxiety or PTSD, depending on what your experiences were. Then beyond that, I know I keep stressing it, but the social exile is just a really big piece of this. A lot of people, when they leave the church, they lose a lot of their friends, if not all overnight. There have also been allegations, or in some cases substantiated reports, of mishandled abuse claims, sexual misconduct, and a toxic leadership culture. They're not isolated events, and they form a clear pattern. If this resonated with you, please know that you are not alone. Leaving a high control group is not just one decision that you make. It's a long journey, and it is filled with grief and doubt and anger, and eventually, if you're super lucky and put in the hard work, a lot of healing. You might also be wondering at this point, has any of this been publicly acknowledged? What does Dwell actually have to say about this? Is this, just something that people are posting about in a Facebook support group or in Reddit threads or whispering about in private conversations, or is this actually a broader problem, and do we have a bigger audience that is paying attention to what's going on here? And the answer is yes. People are talking about it, people are paying attention, and it is growing. Over the past couple years, the serious concerns surrounding Xenos, which is now Dwell, like I said, have gained so much media attention, particularly in central Ohio.
Her research, Steele says she discovered Dwell contained multiple elements of what she considers to be a cult.
You can see so many experiences of people kind of becoming alienated from family and friends who are not within the church. So that isolation seems to be a really common experience in Dwell. Keeping people so busy that they have no time to do anything else. Like, this is a really common experience in a cult. And, experts say, this is about keeping your critical faculties in check. This is also not getting enough sleep, I think, is also a really common experience in this organization.
Local outlets such as the Columbus Dispatch, ABC6 On Your Side, 614 Now, and NBC4 have actually all that I found published investigative reports and human interest stories detailing really disturbing patterns that are going on within this church. They feature interviews with former members, mental health professionals, and advocates who have sounded the alarm on what is going on here. The stories cover a really wide range of troubling allegations, and many former members have actually spoken out about spiritual abuse and the psychological harm, describing how teachings on discipleship and accountability were used to manipulate and control them. Some people even have described being publicly rebuked or shamed or put down for even questioning the leadership or not following the expected path. There have also been serious claims about the mishandling of sexual abuse and harassment cases. In some situations, victims reported feeling silenced, blamed, or discouraged from reporting, especially if the accused held leadership positions or if the situation might damage the church's reputation.
I saw, sexual information that was extracted from, literally minors being shared with these, adults and these college students. I saw someone brought in front of the entire church and have all their sexual history, real and made up, in front of 20 people brought up, and they were shamed and they were treated horribly.
The sense that the institution was being protected at the expense of individuals, particularly vulnerable ones, has been a really consistent and painful theme. A ton of articles have also drawn attention to the way that Dwell's leadership exerts control over personal choices. Like I said, it's who members date, what careers they pursue, how you're spending your money, and even where you live. People that criticize them would argue that this kind of oversight creates a really unhealthy and codependent cycle or dynamic that discourages people from making their own choices, encouraging autonomy, and that fosters, dependence on the church. A number of reports have highlighted Dwell's targeted outreach to youth and to college students, particularly at Ohio State University. These younger members often become deeply embedded into the community at a formative life stage. And critics say that they are especially vulnerable to the pressure, to the guilt, and all of the conformity that the culture of the church promotes and pushes onto you.
That's exactly what happens to Xenos members, says Mark Kennedy, who joined in high school.
You see is subtle manipulations, and what you see is things are just small red flags.
Kennedy and other former Xenos members say trust among peers and disciplers, or mentors, is often exploited.
Outside of traditional media, online support communities have become a really, really powerful tool for visibility on these topics. The Leaving Dwell-Xenos support groups on Reddit and Facebook and on Discord have sometimes thousands of members. These spaces are raw and honest and incredibly important for people that are trying to leave or get more information.
Okay, well, what about these people that are saying that they were hurt and traumatized and damaged from this church? Well, the answer has always been, and probably still is, because that's just how it is that, the evil one has their grip on them. This is just the evil one using them now in a new way to kind of take away people from God's good work. That is what it's always been. I mean, like I said, I grew up on this. That is guarantee you, that is what people are telling a lot of people in the church that are sold on it, is that this is good persecution and that it's the evil one's work on these people, and they're trying to sway us away from what God is trying to do. And for the people that do leave, they're considered good pruning. That's what it is that these people were meant to leave so that the church can grow. And then their response has been, let's go to new states. Let's start something new somewhere else. And so they're taking this persecution as, we need to leave.
People use these forums to share stories about what has happened, ask questions, find validations, and to support each other through the really, really difficult process of leaving and rebuilding. These communities aren't just to vent to each other. They're actually saving lives. You can go take a look at the work that the Chi Alpha Lions Den is doing, for example. It's another video I did on a church cult that is on campus. But some members have even started blogs, they've started hosting podcasts, and have created educational content on cult dynamics that can help people identify cults earlier and leave. Some people also organize local meetups for ex-members that, is located in the Columbus area. These online spaces have become one of the most important forces for accountability, connection, and long-term recovery. And as for Dwell's official response, it's been largely dismissive. Big surprise.
Some of our critics are unhappy with our church. Others are opposed to the Bible itself. We wish them the best.
Church leaders have repeatedly denied that Dwell is a cult, and they call the label slanderous or uninformed. In public statements and on their website, they typically claim that former members are bitter, that they are confused, and that they are unwilling to accept biblical accountability. The church has reframed criticism as persecution, and they paint their critics as being spiritually immature or just misunderstanding what true Christian community is really all about and supposed to look like.
When I was in high school group and I was going to Epic, which is the summer camp for school children, my brother found the Xenos is a cult website. And I think, they have their structure, we are not a cult answer, that they start teaching you from the moment you joined. And I gave the spiel to my mom, and I told her off for that. We were good, we were clear. But then more stories come out, and more stories, and more stories. And sharing those stories, sharing things like this, sharing podcasts, that's the best way to introduce that. Because you see, it's not just me. It's not just my issues with the church. There's 49 signs here, 50 comfortably. there's 500 of us in a Facebook group, and I know at least 10 people are in a Facebook group. And sharing those stories, opening your eyes to be music, the only way that you're gonna get that down.
Like I said, they reframed that 2020 rebrand from Xenos to Dwell as a move to reflect their identity and philosophy better. But, I don't see it that way, and neither did most of the members, and to this day, the patterns have continued, and even under a new label, Dwell has not issued a public apology or taken responsibility for the systemic issues that so many people have raised over the years.
Things that we did back in 2018 was we established this thing that we called the Student Adult Liaison Program, where we got some of our best mediators, negotiators, and we developed a program because we were having a lot of conflict between student leaders and parents, and it was not clear how to mediate, how to work that through. And so we started the liaison program, which has been awesome, which is to help if there's conflict and people are having problems, particularly and specifically between parents and student leaders, that there'd be someone who could go in and help. In 2018, when we started, there were 14 cases that year that were mediation through this formal program. There were 21 in 2019, 17 in 2020, 18 in 2021, 18 in 2022, and in 2023, it dropped to 16. And one of the things we were always trying to do with this program was we wanted to be there for conflict mediation and to help if there were communication issues and people were arguing and couldn't resolve their conflict. But we also wanted to get proactive. We were trying to do like seminars and parent programs and get this stuff going. But there were so many cases, we were like, we can't get to the proactive stuff where we can equip people to avoid having these conflicts. There were 0 official cases. None. I mean, that's remarkable. That's a really great sign. You know, some of you are being cynical and you're like, well, just because they decided the program didn't work. No, the program's awesome. The people that are involved in it are doing great work, and they were able to do all of that proactive stuff that we wanted to have happen. And they're still there, and you know, it probably won't be 0 every year. That wouldn't be realistic, but that is a remarkable thing.
What's happening with Dwell is shocking, but it's not unique. It fits a much larger pattern that is seen in other high-control religious environments like Mars Hill Church, IHOP Kansas City, Sovereign Grace, Hillsong, and others like Chi Alpha. I also made a video about IHOP KC, but the rest of those are on my list. Each of these groups has faced serious allegations of spiritual abuse, authoritarian leadership, emotional manipulation, and silence. The stories are different, but the patterns are the same. There are charismatic leaders, there is an intense discipleship model, and blurred boundaries, and there are cultures that just really value loyalty and image over truth and safety of the members.
After I was kicked out, I later went to a partial hospitalization program. And something that's telling is that my group counselor, she told me that I was number 6 or 7 to come to her group from Xenos. She had only worked there for 3 months.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And I was number 6 or 7. And then like, that's when I started realizing, and I wanted to go back to Xenos. At that point I was like, I'm really working on like repenting. And I was trying to figure out how to grow spiritually from the church discipline because they said it was meant to help me spiritually, And then when I was there, it was like, wait, I shouldn't go back there. That's not good for me.
So yes, this is being talked about and survivors are speaking out. People are listening and you are part of that. You watching this and being aware of what Xenos Dwell is doing and what it has done to so many people. You even knowing about it is a huge deal. Sharing this information with other people can really make a big difference about people understanding what these high control religious environments look like, how to avoid them. And I just think more people need to understand that cults are not just happening at the home churches. Cults are also happening in your mega churches. They're also happening at the church down the street. It is so church to church, and it is really important to do your research and trust your gut at the end of the day if you choose to participate in organized religion, because the truth just is that you are going to place your trust in those leaders. I trusted my pastor at my home church growing up, and to this day, I still trust my pastor from my home church.
I've said on my channel, this thing can be a weapon.
Yeah.
And it can be leveraged at people or in people's lives to effectively control them in ways that they might not even be aware of, that they're using the book and their religion in this way that does cause the harm that I think people who post on Reddit or have contacted you about Dwell, it causes harm. There are degrees to which this thing is weaponized or is not weaponized.
Yeah.
And it can manifest in things like Xenos Dwell through its use of authority. And the fact that Jesus himself seems to delegate or deputize you.
The sheer volume of testimonies and the consistency of the red flags and the growing momentum behind this movement make it impossible for them to ignore. Silence can't protect them anymore, and the more that we talk about it, the more power we take away from harmful institutions, and the more space that we can create for victims and for healing. If you've made it this far, I thank you so much. This is, a heavier topic. It's layered. There's a lot going on, and it is deeply personal for a lot of people. But I really do think that these conversations matter, and the more that we talk about it, the more work we can do. If you have experienced anything yourself from Xenos or Dwell, I would so love to hear about it. Please comment. You can also go and comment on the channel that I linked for you guys.
My channel's focus has changed from general responses to Christianity and even to call atheists to steelman shit, and to be a place for people to engage beliefs and challenge me, but, you know, throw evidence my way if you want. I haven't really gotten too many responses from ex-members. Every once in a while, people will reach out and say, hey, we should hang out. But I find a decent amount of it to be disingenuous. Like, have they repented yet? Is basically
Can we get you back?
Yeah. If you're in an environment that you find spiritually abusive or problematic in your life, find support outside the group. Listen to people who've left the group. And there's hope. Your life isn't over when you leave this group. If you still are convinced Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, I am certain there are other churches who would love to have you.
From our guest, thank you so much for you joining us as well. It takes a lot to speak up about these issues, so I don't want to ever undermine that. It takes a lot of strength, and it's hard and it's scary, especially when you have loved ones that are still participating in the environment. Just know if you're leaving Dwell or somewhere like it, you are not alone, you are not weak, you're not a failure, you're not spiritually immature, you're not spiritually lazy, you're not lukewarm, and you are okay. You will be okay, and you can trust yourself, you can love yourself, and you are allowed to walk away when something doesn't feel right to you. It takes strength, and it means you're a strong person. In the comments, you guys, if you have resources for people that might have been a victim, if you found anything that helped you after leaving a high control religious group, please comment that as well. I would love to share resources. Let's keep it, helpful and supportive. You guys do a really great job at that. My channel, the goal is really, I just see a lot of snark content about religion, and I think it's funny. There's some of it that I think is hilarious. I watch it. I love it. If you can think of a creator, I probably watch them and like them. But there's a lot of times where I don't want to snark because so many people that I love, my family, they're still deep in the church. Not Xenos and Dwell, they're evangelicals, but they're still religious. And I don't think that talking about these conversations in a way that mocks people or puts them down or belittles them in any way is going to be positive. I haven't seen a positive secular and religious space kind of combined with these positive discussions, but I feel like you guys have done just such a good job of creating that in the comments here. It's been super positive, and I love to see us all debating different opinions. And yeah, just thank you guys so much. You've created this more than I have, and I really do appreciate it. Please, if you've made it this far, like this video, share it. You can hit share and copy link. You don't have to send it anywhere, I promise, but it helps way more than you think that it does. And if you want to comment, but you don't know what to comment a bird or a dove emoji. That is my logo, so I'll respond back with a heart. And I really do respond back to as many of you guys as I can. So if you do comment, there is a good chance that I will actually respond to you. Please subscribe or double check to make sure that you are already subscribed if you're not. And yeah, I really appreciate it. Take care of yourselves, be gentle with yourselves and with your story, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.